All right, everyone. Welcome back to Great Debates, Great Decisions, Great Deciders. Just want to begin by thanking our sponsors this evening, Dr. Lee Edelstein, who's sponsoring this evening in honor of his dear, loving, and cherished wife, Faye Edelstein, Zechrona Livracha. And we very much appreciate the support that you, Dr. Edelstein, have given us in our learning Torah. And there is no question that this is a tremendous merit for your wife's neshama, and may she go to the highest points in Gan Eden. And also Yaakov and Devorah Shore, who sponsored this evening in memory of Yaakov's father Milton. Also through our learning, certainly this is a merit for his neshama, and he should go to the highest points in Gan Eden. We have been discussing over the last few weeks the real impact that Rabbeinu Gershom 960 to 1040 had on the Jewish world, had specifically on the Ashkenazi world, where Rabbeinu Gershom, as he was known as the Meor Hagola, he was known as the light of the diaspora, because what Rabbeinu Gershom basically did is that he revolutionized the halachic approach, the way that we approach practicing Torah and adhering to Torah values in, at his time, the modern world. And this practice he was really the first since the Gemara, essentially, to add on new and specific practices or new law, new statutes in order to add on fences to adhere to the Torah in order so that the Torah spirit would continue. And last week we had spoken about how Rabbeinu Gershom understood the meta lesson of the Torah, that he understood that the Torah is the that we have an obligation as the Jewish people, as the Am HaNivchar, to be able to bring the light of the Torah into the world, because the Torah, by its very nature, is Daracheha Darchei Noam. It is peaceful, it is pleasant, and we have to be able to bring that out into the rest of the world. So I want to just focus on tonight as kind of the postscript to our whole discussion of Rabbeinu Gershom, the one of his many haramim, one of his many takanos, many institutions that he made, which is that of reading other people's mail. It's probably the one of the many that he made that has the most practical ramifications probably today. The other two, there's one very practical that still applies today, of course, which is you can't divorce your wife against her will. Which, according to the letter of the law of the Torah, that would be okay. But Rabbeinu Gershom put a stop to that. And another one that is, I guess, practiced today is that Rabbeinu Gershom put a stop on polygamy, which still in Sephardic communities, probably up until the establishment of the State of Israel, certainly in the Middle Eastern countries like Syria and Iran, I know of people, I have friends of mine that their great-grandparents had more than one wife. The great-grandfather had more than one wife. This was a common thing in Sephardic lands, but Rabbeinu Gershom, at least in the Ashkenazic world, which we'll talk about how it didn't necessarily go over to the other lands, but Rabbeinu Gershom put a stop on polygamy. But probably the one area of halacha that he touched on that still we are grappling with, and as innovations of connection and of sharing information continue to come up, and new inventions of communication come up. Connectivity is increasing across the world. So therefore, the law that Rabbeinu Gershom put into practice of not reading another person's mail is becoming so much more practical. And we're going to have to get to the ramifications of this law and see how it pertains to different areas of life. Well, let's take a step back for a minute and just talk about really why is it that a person cannot read another person's mail? Well, what's the problem with it? So the Maharam Rutenberg deals with the following question that he was given. Maharam Rutenberg was the Rebbe of the Rush. Okay, so the Rosh Rabbeinu, or his mom didn't call him Rosh. His mom called him by his name, Asher. By the way, Rabbeinu Asher was named for the son of Yaakov Avinu, Asher ben Yaakov, whose yortzeit is actually tonight. According to some historians, the yortzeit of Asher ben Yaakov is actually on, I guess, Motzei Shabbos, the 4th of Shvat, but according to most historians, it's tonight, Asher ben Yaakov. So anyway, so the Rosh Rabbeinu Asher, he was a halachic posek. He was a posek first in the land of Ashkenaz in Germany, and then at the end of his life ended up moving to Toledo, Spain, along with his son Rabbeinu Yaakov, the Tur, who became a close friend of the Abu Dram. Anyway, the Jewish world is there. They were playing Jewish geography back then also. So the Rosh was a student of the Maram Rutenberg, and he refers to the Maram Rutenberg on occasions where he argues with his Rebbe. He kind of says, well, it's almost not fair because the Maram Rutenberg already passed away. And once the Rebbe passes away, how can I argue with him? But I don't have a choice. I have to argue with him because this is the way I see the halacha. And he always puts in the framework, he says that once the lion dies, it's very easy to take the lion to battle. It's very easy to fight the lion once he dies. He looked at the Maram Rutenberg as having a clear understanding of the way that Jewish law worked. We're talking about 12th century, early 13th century over here. So anyway, the Maram Rutenberg, when he lived, I guess, about 200 years after the Haramim, these institutions from Rabbeinu Gershom, were put into practice. And he says that this halacha of not, reading another person's mail is really a halacha about gleaning information about another person against their will. So he puts in the following context. The question was asked him that there was a letter that ended up in the trash. So if a letter ends up in the trash, are you allowed to go over and read the letter? So said Maram Rutenberg, it would seem as though it should not be a problem. Why? Because as soon as the person puts it in the garbage, what essentially they're saying is, right, one man's garbage is another man's treasure, and they're basically giving up ownership of it, right? They're letting go of it. They're relinquishing their right to it at this point. So once it gets put into the garbage, who knows where it's going to go? So a person has a understanding, which is why there was an institution of shredders, right? Because a person wants to be able to discard their information while also holding on to their privacy. So this is the way that Maram Rutenberg understands it. However, anything short of that, unless there's explicit permission that's given to read the other person's mail, you would not be able to do so. Putting in the trash is like explicit permission, but other than that, you can't just go over and read another person's mail. You see the person sitting next to you on the bus sending a text message, you can't, look over and see who they're texting. I don't know why you would want to see a random stranger's text messages, but someone that of course, or you want to get information about, you're looking at that's a problem. Looking at a person's text messages, emails, faxes. Now, faxes are interesting because faxes, let's say you work in an office where there's a number of faxes coming in, right? So it could be that there's an implicit understanding that if there's a fax coming into the office, there's going to be people that see it. Or there was something of high sensitivity, so then it would have to be declassified in such a way. But if it's not coming in a declassified way and it is coming in basically out in the open, so there it could very well be that it's like the trash. That's something that the post can discuss. Anyway, it's, I think, just good to put into context exactly how this halacha was established, that it's really a halacha against going above someone else's head, going against, without their permission, looking at their personal information. Let's take a step back. Let's take a step back further in order so that we can properly understand this. And the place I'd like to start at is really a place of what are these haramim of Rabbeinu Gershom? What are these institutions that Rabbeinu Gershom established, these statutes? And I think it's important to note that not all of them are exactly the same. They were not intended to be the same. They were not intended to have the same rules and regulations. I'll give you an example. So we had mentioned probably the three most famous ones are reading someone else's mail, polygamy, and divorcing someone against their will, a husband divorcing their wife against their will. The cherem against, let's say, polygamy, as we mentioned in the Sephardic community, was never accepted. Again, this is one individual here. This is Rabbeinu Gershom. Rabbeinu Gershom decided that this is the way Klal Yisrael should go. The land of Ashkenaz accepted his position. Outside the land of Ashkenaz, in this particular issue, it was not accepted. There were perfectly happy marriages taking place with 1, 2, 3, 4, 10 wives happening in the Middle East, in Sephardic communities. Why do I need to take on this? Okay, in the land of Ashkenaz, it was important for him to establish this law, but not outside necessarily the land of Ashkenaz. Thank you. So I think it's important to just note, and that's a good example where not all haram are created equal. And I think Rabbeinu Gershom understood that specifically in that example, which is why in that example, he actually put a time stamp on it and a time limit. He said that, this cherem is being established right now, again, which was around the year 1000 CE in the Common Era, around the year 1000, and was only supposed to be in effect until the year 5000 since the creation of the world. So that is 781 years ago. So 781 years ago, this this statute of Rabbeinu Gershom of not having more than one wife expired, meaning he saw it as a time sensitive issue. That right now this is a problem. Doesn't mean that it's always going to be a problem, but right now this is a problem. And therefore, he said that for the next few hundred years, I want to have this in effect. And the Ashkenazi communities accepted that. The Sephardic communities never accepted it. Then around the year 5000, the Ashkenazic poskim at the time, the halachic decision makers, decided, you know what, we see this as something that may have been a time-sensitive issue during the time of Rabbeinu Gershom, but we see this as something that is a timeless issue. This is something that is always going to be a problem. There's going to be shalom bias issues that come up if there's more than one wife in the home, and therefore we are going to put a stop on this forever. And this is what's quoted in the Ramah, that the Ramah says that the poskim at the time, just over 700, close to 800 years ago, decided that this is something that is going to be everlasting. And when that happened, so then throughout Ashkenazi communities now forever, this is the way the halacha is, that polygamy is a problem. Now, it's very possible that at this point, and this is something that is discussed by the Sephardic poskim, that at this point, maybe even Sephardim have accepted this custom of staying away from polygamy. But it's unclear whether or not they ever accepted it. It could very well be that they just don't, because there are laws of the land in certain countries that prohibit this anyway. But just interesting to note that not all the haram are created equal. Now, when it comes to divorcing someone's wife against their will, that was something that Rabbeinu Gershom at the outset said that this is something that this was something that was supposed to last forever. And all of the Ashkenazi communities accepted it, and the Sephardic communities accepted it. So this was accepted by everyone. This is what the Chassam Sofer says, that it was a universal acceptance of the law that you cannot divorce your wife against her will, and this is something everlasting. Now, the Ramban, Rabbeinu Moshe ben Nachman, passed away in 1270 in the land of Israel, lived from 1194 to 1270. So the Ramban, Marty, did I get it right? Give me a thumbs up, Marty. So the Ramban, I got a thumbs up. Thumbs down? Oh no, the Ramban, when did he live? He didn't live from 1194 to 1270? Okay, when Marty's wireless Wi-Fi is a little bit more connected, they'll tell me why. Write it in the chat, Marty. Oh, it's a thumbs up. Okay, a thumbs up. All right, 2 thumbs up. Okay, good. So says the Ramban. The Ramban has it's an understatement to say a monumental work on the Torah. Now, the Ramban was more than just a good theorist. He was more than just a good commentator. He was more than just a good elucidator. the Ramban was arguably the greatest Jewish philosopher, could very well be probably since Shlomo HaMelech. The Ramban in the area of Jewish philosophy was par excellence, and someone that today is still relevant and accepted. In fact, the Chassam Sofer writes in his tzava, in his ethical will, he writes that he would like for his family to take on the practice of learning all of Tanakh with Rashi, and the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, with the commentary of the Ramban, because contained within the commentary of the Ramban is what proper Jewish outlook on the world is. Proper world Jewish outlook, worldview comes from the Ramban al Torah. So the Ramban at the end of Parshas Bechukosai says that this cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom of not divorcing your wife against her will is not a superimposed law in and of itself that kind of came in a vacuum that Rabbeinu Gershom said that I see an issue in our time that needs to be squashed. It's not like the previous one. It's not like polygamy. But rather, it's much more than that, says the Ramban. This, says the Ramban, Rabbeinu Gershom looked at it and said that this is not within the rubric of what proper Torah outlook is. That the Torah, maybe at one point in history, did not see an issue with this. But when looking at the Torah from a zoomed out perspective, it now does not make any sense that one could divorce their wife against their will, and therefore we need to put this statute into writing and into practice, that one cannot divorce their wife against her will. And says the Ramban that this is not a rabbinic cherem. This is what he coins the term of cherem deoraisa, that it's a statute, but under the prism of Torah law. So in fact, this law, according to the Ramban, actually took on the same level of eating chametz on Pesach, meaning like it took on the same sense of authoritativeness of anything that would be written in the Torah. Now, obviously, eating chametz on Pesach has a severity of that it is that it has a severity that you get a spiritual excommunication, you get a punish of kares. So I don't mean that it's the same level of severity, but it's the same level of authoritativeness as any other one of the 613 mitzvot. This is what the Ramban says. When it comes to mail, reading another person's mail, the Stei Chemed says that this was another one of the charamim, of the institutions, the statutes by Rabbeinu Gershom. Another one of the statutes that was universally accepted and something that did not have an expiration date. Okay, there was never an expiration date on the prohibition of reading another person's mail. Rabbeinu Gershom around the year 1000 said, we can't do this anymore. And for the last X number of years, about 1,000 years, 1,021 years, or whatever it is, we have accepted this across the board. Ashkenazim, Sephardim, Hasidim, everybody across the board has accepted this law. And the question that we need to pose is this cherem like the cherem of divorcing your wife against her will, that it is, as the Ramban said, a cherem deoraisa. It is a statute that is of the same level of authoritativeness, just as any one of the 613 mitzvot? Or is this a lower level, like any other custom that one has? It is just merely a custom that we've taken upon ourselves to not read another person's mail? Or is this severe, that this is like violating something from the Torah? So I think it's important to understand what would be the problem with reading another person's mail. Now, we pointed out before from the Maram Rutenberg that reading another person's mail is breaching privacy. It's breaching privacy. And therefore, if a person relinquishes ownership over it, they don't care about it anymore, they throw it in the trash, he says there'd be nothing wrong with reading it. basically the person is volunteering information about them. But the Sdei Chemed says that while yes, that is true, that the person can relinquish that right and they could say, listen, go ahead and read whatever this is about me. But the definition, the proper definition is to explain why a person can't read another person's mail is not because it's an issue of theft, but rather he feels that it's an issue of lashon hara. So what do I mean by lashon hara? How is it lashon hara? So what the Sdei Chemed explains is that this Rabbeinu Gershom felt is a proper fence around lashon hara. Because what's the problem with lashon hara? The problem with lashon hara is that it could ruin a person's reputation, that it could be spreading falsehoods about a person. So when you go and you peek over at what someone is texting, so potentially you could be learning something about someone that person did not want being shared. So it is essentially another form of lashon hara. I like to say that if the Chafetz Chaim was still alive, he would probably write another sefer on Instagram, and he'd write another sefer about Facebook, and write another sefer about Twitter. What the amount of information that's being shared today about each other, and it's out there, and people learn about each other in a way that could lead to reputations being tainted or distorted, changed, etc. I think it's important to point out that, the Rambam says that the Torah refers to lashon hara. By the way, lashon hara, what's the definition of lashon hara? Lashon, speech, that's hara, evil. Lashon hara is evil speech. People like to just throw around the term lashon hara, gossip. Gossip has, the entertainment industry has kind of made gossip something that is just part of, regular life, right? People magazine has just made gossip just normal, right? It's the gossip's fine. It's gabbing. It's not a big deal, right? It's hot air. Lashon hara means evil speech. And I hate to be so firm and blunt, but I think it's important to be firm and blunt when it comes to these kinds of things. When the Torah calls something evil, that means it's evil. So the Torah refers to lashon hara as dibur shav. So shav means false, that it's false words, it's false speech. So the Rambam deals with the question of, well, what if it's fact? Fact is not false. Fact is truth. What if it's true? So how does the Torah unequivocally refer to lashon hara as just speech about another person, as dibur shav, when it might not be shav? It might actually be true. It might not be false. So why? So the Rambam explains such a fundamental point when it comes to understanding the severity of lashon hara. He says, let's even assume that what you were attempting to share was true and was fact. But there are so many factors that go into human communication that it would be impossible to relay this information in a perfectly correct, true, factual manner. Just take for an example. Let's say, for example, that a person shares with another person, I just saw that Rabbi Reich got a new Tesla. Do you see that Rabbi Reich got a new Tesla? So let's assume Rabbi Reich did get a new Tesla. Okay, let's pretend. Let's go into my fantasy. Okay, I got a new Tesla. Rabbi Reich got a new Tesla. Did you hear? So while the facts are true, I did get a new Tesla, but the inflection the person says that with, did you hear that Rabbi Reich got a new Tesla? That says so much. The body language, the inflection, the choice of words, the fact that it's being taken out of context. So many different variables add to the greater narrative of my life. And therefore, even when facts are being shared, by definition, says the Rambam, it's false. It's impossible to share actual truth, perfect 100% truth. You can get close, but for it to be 100% true about another person. This is why the Chazon Ish, when his students asked him, Rabbi, we want to start learning the laws of Lashon Hara, what would be the best way to do it? So the Chazon Ish said, I don't understand. Why do you have to learn the laws of Lashon Hara? What do you mean? The Lashon Hara is a terrible, terrible thing, right? There are laws in the Rambam about Lashon Hara. There's a whole parak in Shas about Lashon Hara in Maseches Erechim. Lashon Hara is a very severe thing. He says, please, explain it to me again. I don't understand. Why do you have to learn the laws of Lashon Hara? So they think the Rebbe lost it, right? We're talking about the Chazon Ish. We're talking about the Chazon Ish over here. So they say, what do you mean? The Chafetz Chaim wrote a whole work about the severity of Lashon Hara and so many different prohibitions surrounding Lashon Hara. Why wouldn't we have to learn the laws of Lashon Hara? Chazon Ish said, I don't understand. Do you want to know the laws of Lashon Hara? All of Hilchos Lashon Hara are summed up into the following. Don't speak about other people. That's it. That's the whole thing. You don't need to learn the laws. That's the whole thing. Obviously, the Chafetz Chaim had a different approach than the Chazon Ish, but I think that both fundamentally agree that that's what it is. It's just speaking about another person. And I think that the Rambam emphasized this point because the Torah calls it Dibor Shav, because it's impossible to share perfectly accurate information about another person. And this especially applies to when seeing a private letter that is written to another person, a person's personal text messages, WhatsApps, reading, listening to messages, eavesdropping on someone else's conversation and the like. Now, the poskim do point out that doesn't mean that if a person is speaking very loudly and they're having a quote unquote private conversation in the same room as you, that you need to get up and leave, right? That's not what it means. What it means is that you shouldn't be sneaky. You shouldn't try and get information about another person, that they are not openly sharing, because ultimately that is going to change, even if this is facts and it's true, and it's not even that sensitive information. It doesn't matter. This stuff can affect a person's reputation, and therefore, I think based on this, I think we could say that this too is considered a cherem d'oraisa. It's really just an offshoot of an institution that already exists in the Torah of misinformation about others, even if it's true. Now, the Rashba, by the way, when the Rush, who we had mentioned before, when the Rush moved from Germany in 1301 to Spain, to Toledo, Spain. And he lived the last 26 years of his life there until he passed away in 1327. So he befriended the Rashba, who was the chief rabbi at the time in Toledo. The Rashba is an amazing commentary on the Gemara, but the Rashba also was a halachist and someone that had a mastery, obviously, of Jewish law, and had written so many tshuvas, so many responsa. Tonight I'm mentioning just one of his many hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of responsa. This is found in the first volume of the Rashba. This is the 557th one of his responsa. So we're talking about loads of questions coming from all over the world to the Rashba. And the Rashba has posed the question of parents or educators that need to be able to check in and quote unquote spy on either their children or their students in order to make sure that they are being safe and the like. So the Rashba basically says that now Rabbeinu Gershom did not intend for this to be harmful to another person, right? If this is something that a parent needs to do, that every once in a while they need to just check in a respectful way, of course, while keeping a sense of trust with their children, just to check in on them to make sure that they are being safe, especially in the world that we're living in today. At least the Rashba says from a halachic perspective, there's nothing wrong with it. Whether or not from a parenting perspective, it's the best direction to go in. I think that's a very subjective call. But I think that is just an important note to make when we're discussing this whole concept and this whole institution, that according to the Rashba, it's important to note that Rabbeinu Gershom wanted this to be something that is helpful, that is not going to hurt a person. And if by not reading someone's mail it could hurt a person, then, right, for example, let's say a person is in danger and you need to be able to help them by going through their text messages in order to find information that can save them from this predicament. So then, of course, the Rashba says you have to do what you have to do, right? Rabbeinu Gershom never intended this to hurt another person, right? Only to help people in order to keep shalom and the like. Okay, we will stop here for now. I wish everyone a beautiful and wonderful Shabbos. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. And thank you again to our sponsors, the Shores and the Edelstein Resdenkoff family. Thank you so much. And we will pick up next week. We are open for suggestions for the next mini-series in Great Debates, Great Decisions, Great Deciders. Thank you to the Lincolns for suggesting Rabbeinu Gershom. It has been a robust, wonderful series for me to look into these topics. I've really appreciated it. If anyone has any suggestions, any of our listeners on YouTube, please feel free to share them with me. Next time we're together, the thought is to discuss great Ds of the COVID vaccine. But that's probably going to be just a one-off series, just a one-time shear. Probably not going to take more than 1 or 2 sessions to go through that. So if you have any suggestions of other series we can approach, feel free to share them with me. Okay, I am 6 minutes late for my next class, so I have to stop here. Anyone have any questions, feel free to send me a note.